Buying Melbourne, where capital meets property. I'm your host, Madeline Roberts. Let's begin. This episode is brought to you by Frame Finance. Great buying starts well before you're standing at an auction. It starts with knowing exactly what you can borrow, how your structure is set up, and having a broker who actually understands the market. Frame Finance work with all kinds of buyers, first home, next home, investment, and they bring the expertise and speed that makes a real difference when a deal is in front of you. Reach out to Imogen and the team at Frame Finance. Find them in the show notes. Okay, so today's big one. My guest has spent close to 4 decades selling real estate in this city. He's been the number 1 ranked agent in Australia multiple times in a row, actually, I believe. Is that
3 times, I think
3
it was.
times?
Yeah. It was a while ago, though.
Yeah. And he's a director and auctioneer at Marshall White, so one of the most respected prestige agencies in the country. You also opened up Marshall White on the Mornington Peninsula, but do you want to tell me a little bit about yourself and where you sell real estate?
Absolutely, Madeline. Thanks for the opportunity to have a chat this morning. Yes, I've been in real estate for 4 decades. I've really predominantly been in Boroondara, so that's based in Hawthorn. And because of a personal move a number of years ago, I commenced the Mount Eliza office, and I really had thoughts about going between the two, and then I thought I was going to focus more on Mount Eliza because I was living locally. But in the end, due to a change in personal circumstances, I decided to move back to Boroondara permanently, and trying to probably work both markets was a challenge in itself because I spent a lot of time going up and down that freeway. I knew it and still know it all so well. But ultimately, yeah, my experience really has largely been in areas within Boroondara, the Hawthorn, Kew, Camberwell, Canterbury, Baldwin, Surrey Hills, Glen Iris, etc. That's largely been my experience, but also Stonington and different parts of Melbourne, but that's the main focus realistically. But I do have a soft spot, as I mentioned before we came on this morning, for Mount Eliza, given I guess commenced the office with Chelsea and with Adrian and Louise at the time, and obviously they've recruited extremely well. They've got some outstanding operators, but that's where the bulk of my experience has been in the time. And Marshall White, I've been there for 22 years, and my brother Hamish and I started the office in Boroondara at about that time. So I've been blessed to work around some very talented people, but at the same time we've got a great brand, and that obviously helps us as well.
Amazing. And so these are both very prestige markets. Now, what is your, I suppose, average sale price, and what is one of the most expensive properties that you think you've worked on?
Well, the average sale price for me is around about the 3 million mark, approximately. The best individual sale I've had was just shy of 20 million, but we've got individual operators within the Marshall White team. Marcus Caminello is the obvious example, who sold properties a few years ago now, but there were 2 within a very short period of time in the 70s and around 80. So that's the other end of the market completely.
Wow.
But ultimately, Marshall White's probably known. I mean, we do sell a lot of properties in that 2, 3, 4, 5 million space, and below that, of course, as well, and naturally well above that. So there's many sales. I've had one a couple of weeks ago, a bit over 10. We'd love to handle those consistently, Madeline, but we're equally very happy to handle a cross-section of properties. So we're always very careful to point that out, to highlight that.
And I suppose the median house price in some of those key suburbs that you do work in, such as Hawthorn East and Kew and Canterbury, I think they sit around that $3 million median. Is that correct?
They vary incredibly. It obviously depends if it's a newer style of property, which especially the Asian clientele within Boroondara are known for. That's their preferred type of home. We call that a French provincial style.
Yes.
Contemporary architecture, but probably mirrored on houses that, to me, I don't think they really are French provincial. They're not true French provincial homes, but that's what they're referred to. But there's also a lovely blend of period homes as well. We're lucky in terms of the areas we operate in that there's some magnificent period homes, and there's probably less now that are completely unrenovated that require total restoration. There's a handful, but most of them have had work done at some stage. They might be dated and need further updating. But yeah, there's good consistency with streetscapes, and but still a mix at the same time. But in terms of quality of homes, I think there's some good consistency, whether it be period or modern. We're very lucky in the areas we operate in. They're affluent areas where Marshall White's known on the Mornington Peninsula, Bayside, Stonington and Boroondara in particular. They are affluent areas. So does help. In a changing market where, interest rates have gone up and world events have had an impact, I think there'd be some peripheral areas, some outer areas in Melbourne that have probably been more challenging, maybe a bit more mortgage stress, etc., Madeline. So I'm not saying it doesn't exist in the areas in which Marshall White operate, but it's not as much of a factor.
Okay, because this is one of the questions I was going to ask. So with regards to rising interest rates and where the market cycle is at the moment, how are people... What's the level of confidence right now towards that higher end of the market?
I think, in my view, it's a very, what I call a price-sensitive market. So with any property, if you're giving a very realistic indication to the vendor as to the likely value, and part of the skill in our industry is, of course, knowing your market and giving someone a responsible idea, a realistic idea about what they're likely to achieve for their property. There are some agents, and I say this carefully, Madeline, who inflate the likely price to get the listing. And then I think ultimately the flow and effect when people go to open for inspections and there aren't as many people coming through, or auctions that aren't as well attended and the bidding's not as competitive, the flow and effect from that is people begin then, it does affect their confidence. They do look around the market and say maybe there's not the same level of interest in real estate, in property. It doesn't matter if it's prestige end or not. It's still a factor. As you climb up in price, probably interest rates wouldn't be naturally referred to as frequently. But having said that, even if someone moves to a property which is worth 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 or above that again, what they're moving from, what they're trading up from is absolutely impacted by interest rates. So that's a consideration. But when I say price sensitive, if a vendor's given good advice at the start and the guide in the marketplace, so their statement of information as it's known, the SOI, if that's a realistic guide, then the bulk of properties are selling. It's still a market where many, countless transactions are happening. But if you haven't got that, sure, it's a lot tougher. But then that seems to probably erode the confidence you talk about when probably sit there and vendors are unrealistic. And a lot of people in real estate, certainly vendors, will say, I need to get a certain outcome. I need to get a certain price. Well, it doesn't matter whether someone's trading up, trading down, whether they're going through a divorce, whether they're selling for financial reasons. The buyers don't really care. They don't buy their circumstances.
No.
They're not really, in their mind, what they're focused on is what can we get for our money, of course, and they look at comparable sales and they really specialise. If they're looking at a certain price bracket, they become so familiar with that price bracket and what you get for your money. So that's a really important consideration as well. So part of it's confidence, but I think also part of it's just, if the agent's got the right approach from the outset, it's amazing the impact that can have and the flow and effect I talked about.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so when I have a look at some of those key areas that you work in, the median the median days on market at the moment, it flows around about 30 days, which is considerably low considering the price point, in my opinion, especially in comparison to somewhere like Mount Eliza, Mount Martha, where they are similar markets in terms of the prestige side, and they might sit for about 60 plus days on market. What do you think the key differences are there?
Yeah, no, there is a big difference. And having had some exposure to that Mount Eliza, Mornington, Mount Martha market, I think realistically there are or have been a greater number of buyers that have been keen to buy in the suburbs in which we operate. There's probably been larger numbers that open for inspections. Parts of the Mornington Peninsula, of course, as you know, Madeline, we've got an office in Flinders and we have an office in Sorrento. So if it's more of a holiday house type market, because of land tax and other considerations, a lot of people have opted to get out of that market.
They have.
There's only so many buyers to go around. So to me, that's been a much more challenging market, a much harder market.
I could imagine.
And certainly whilst days on market can is certainly longer, as you say, 60 days compared to approximately 30, I still feel part of it is pricing hopes and expectations. That's definitely part of it. I think there's patience required in that market as a vendor. At the same time, how many vendors are out there? There's so many, Madeline, that start at a more optimistic price. This is really what we're hoping to get. This is what we'd love to get. This is what we aspire to get. And I think on occasions they'll sit there for probably longer than they need to in the hope, almost a vague hope, that they're going to end up close to where they'd love to be.
So their expectations just aren't realistic.
Yeah, that's definitely part of it. And look, part of it too is the skill set, because as an agent, it's important that you communicate with your clients, and how you convey that message is, of course, very relevant, and making sure they're knowledgeable and educated about what their properties are worth. But of course, in our industry, we deal with some stubborn people. We deal with some very determined people who think they're right. And real estate's not about right or wrong. It's not about, well, my price is right and all the buyers are wrong. If you're getting, doesn't matter whether you're getting 15 or 20 or 30 or 40 groups of people through a property, if the best buyers in the marketplace feel a property is worth a certain amount of money and there's pushback from the vendor, there's a message. And when you're not getting offers, there's a message in the silence.
100%.
And I say that to clients the whole time. If it was priced well, priced accurately, you'll get offers. You'll get people that want to buy your property. And that applies to any market, including the peninsula.
Yeah, okay, really interesting. And I suppose the days on market in those areas that you work in, even within comparison to other suburbs across Melbourne, it is still fairly low. Why is there such a strong level of demand in those particular suburbs, in that prestige market still?
In our market?
Yeah, in yours.
I think mainly, I can only focus on the areas in which I operate in. Schools are a huge driver.
Is it?
So we did a recent survey of our market in terms of the last 650 odd sales, and about a third of them were to Chinese clients. Now, of course, there's other, there's Sri Lankan families and Vietnamese families and a host of others, and of course a lot of Anglo-Saxon families as well. But there's a significant percentage that are sold to China, and these are local Chinese, Madeline. These are people that have lived in the country. They've got permanent residency.
Not foreigners.
So that's definitely a part of it. I think the schools, given the number of private schools that we have in our market, that's a huge motivator to people. Okay. And there's just people that aspire to living closer to those schools and reducing their drive factor. If they're moving or travelling with their children from a fair way out, it obviously does become tiring. It's a wearing process, because it's not just getting them to school and back, it's the after-school activities and sport and music and drama, etc. So I think families, where they can, will get closer to those schools, and that's a big consideration. Okay. They are beautiful areas. It's easy to be biased, but I grew up in North Bourne. I know that market so well. I live in Canterbury now. It's been my whole career, really, for 40 years. If you drive the streets and you look at the consistency of homes and the tree-lined streets that we operate in, I think we are very blessed to work in the areas that we work in. I think Marshall White as a company works, generally their offices are in,
beautiful locations.
Lovely areas.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so let's touch on market cycles. So you have been doing real estate for quite a number of decades now. You have seen rates when they potentially were at about 17 or 18%. Is that correct?
I did. Luckily, that was very early in my career, Madeline. Okay. But of course, when you look at we talk about mortgage stress, and you think, God, it's just hard to fathom the interest rates at that level and what impact that must have had on people. But as we know, there are a lot of cost of living pressures at the moment, and that's a concern to some people. There's some caution being expressed because of that. But as you're touching on, I've really seen so many highs and lows over the 4 decades I've been in real estate. I've seen different cycles, and there's been different times where I've thought there are challenges that exist in our market, and other times where you think, gee, the market's flowing well and the sales are consistent. The auction success, as I call it, the industry calls it clearance rate, but I've never liked that word. It sounds like a clearance sale at Myer. So the success rate at auction has been incredibly high at times, sometimes in that 80 to 85 to 90%. Now, it's not at that level right now, but it's also a matter of how many bidders have we got, and realistically, across Melbourne, there wouldn't be the number of bidders that we probably had last year, maybe the year before, but there's still interest in buying. It's just how aligned to the market are vendors. But there's always an adjustment, even allowing for those cycles, Madeline, we're talking about. When the market's absolutely flying along, there are still vendors that are ahead of the market. There are still vendors that anticipate and hope and want more than they probably might be worth. So in any market, that can happen. Of course. Around expectations.
Okay, and so at the moment, there is a little bit of fear because we've got increased interest rates. There's things going on in the Middle East. How do you think that could potentially play out? So from my point of view, I saw yesterday the Treasurer has said that, this could have the same shock on our economy that we saw during the COVID pandemic. So from my point of view personally, I see it as a really large window of opportunity. I'm wondering what you think and what your vendors are perhaps thinking and what you think might happen next based off some of the cycles that you've seen play out.
Well, the funny thing is, at the moment, in my opinion, there are still some vendors that think, maybe we'll try again in spring. And I'm thinking, why would it be better in spring necessarily? I mean, the chances of it being a stronger market in spring is probably fairly slim in my humble view. But I think fear is an interesting word, and I appreciate it's just a word you've used, and I'm not saying it's not used out in the market and in the media. Of course it is, but to me there is a degree of uncertainty with some. It depends what occupation that they may have or what industry they may be in, because obviously some are more affected than others. Obviously there's been some high profile retrenchments and layoffs in some industries, and that has an impact on what people are thinking. And there's always that sense of, are we better to wait rather than commit? But the opportunity that you refer to is real, because if you've got a situation where someone says, well, I'm not going to get a better opportunity to trade up at the moment, given the gap, maybe the margin's a little smaller than it was. But I also think if someone's really wanting to downsize and they think, well, what are the options? Do we wait 3, 4, 5 years? Do we really want to wait that long? We're ready to do something now. We're going to live mainly at the beach or in the country or interstate, and we're going to have a town base in Melbourne. If the time's right in that person's life, I don't know, to me, to wait for the market, I think the reality is with debt levels where they are in Victoria, it's not as if there's going to be a really, really quick turnaround. I think we're going to deal with a market, in my opinion, that's steady. We're not likely to see much growth realistically. That's not being negative. I'm just trying to be realistic about it.
So do you know what? It's quite interesting because I'm a buyer's agent. Over the past couple of months, and I mean, even over the past couple of weeks, I've actually seen an increase in client intake. So I don't think it's going to scare too many people off. And I do feel as though prices will still continue to go up, but that's just me. When I have a look at the data specifically for some of your suburbs there, I can also see that although they're around that 30 days on market, which is a very healthy market, days on market looks to still be declining. So that means that there is increased demand still, particularly in your markets as well.
There is great demand. And I think this is the danger too, because in our industry, we've always got to be careful too to listen to some of the negativity that's out there, because even sometimes when you speak to some of your peers, like your competitors, and you think, God, how are you going to make sales the way you're talking about the market? Because the reality is we do, as I said much earlier, we do deal with areas, affluent areas, where there's always going to be that demand. And I think what we're finding, Melanie, has probably been more that adjustment for vendors, thinking, okay, what's now reality in our marketplace? That's probably been the bigger adjustment. I think the demand's there. I think there's always going to be interest in the areas in which we operate. I'm blessed in that respect. And I think to me, the Marshall White team in its entirety are blessed, really, and the areas in which we largely perform. And it's for the combination of reasons I mentioned earlier. So as to what it's going to do in terms of increases, I think what people have been used to over 5 years, 7 years, 10 years is they probably had unrealistic thoughts in their mind about the gains they might make in 10 years. It doesn't mean that it's not improving. It's just probably in their mind they thought it would improve even more.
Yeah, okay.
But let's face it, through COVID, that was such a topsy-turvy period. And as you know, there were parts of Victoria and properties in Australia that escalated to unbelievable levels.
Yeah,
incredible.
So that's why all of this talk, I actually am. I'm also just thinking that the market will potentially go up. I think there's that small opportunity that it will really go up. So I feel quite excited about that.
Yeah.
Let's also just quickly touch on, I suppose, yourself. So you opened the Mornington Peninsula office. You've got a really excellent career. You were, as you said, Agent of the Year for 3 years there. And apparently 1 year you did 400 million in sales. Is that,
something like that.
True?
I used to probably focus a bit more on the stats. I probably don't focus as much now. And there's now many agents, mainly in Sydney and Brisbane, I think, that have surpassed the very best agents in Victoria. But no, I'm proud of that achievement.
Huge. It's huge.
It's exciting. But I think for me, I've been in it for a long period of time, but I maintain my high energy levels, and I think I've got a very positive attitude generally to success. And I think in life, I never wanted to be average or mediocre, but I enjoy what I do. And that's not just, I'm not just saying that. I'm very passionate about what I do. I often say to clients, it's almost insane how much I love what I do. It's probably not normal how much I love what I do, Madeline, but it's something that I do when I get to the office each day. It's not for me a chore. It's not, I have to ring, as I do each week, 200 prospecting nurture calls, which has really been the foundation of my business. That's why I've been successful, because I've been prepared to keep in touch with people. I sat down with some people last night. I sold them the home in 1999, didn't compete against another company. For them, they said it was an easy decision. They weren't even considering another agency. So that, of course, fuels belief, but it gives you confidence that all the systems that you've got in place, and I'm very system and procedure focused, it's worthwhile because it's a nice reward. It doesn't mean every single person is going to be loyal to me, but the majority are if you make that effort and you build a good rapport, because that's part of being good at what you do in any, well, plenty of different, not just real estate. You've got to be approachable, likable, be easy to relate to, have a genuine enthusiasm, not a forced one.
We were talking about this before. Yes, I think it shows. It shows, you radiate it if you're truly passionate about it.
I agree. And I really do. When I say to clients, they can tell. I mean, in terms of energy levels, they're always high in terms of what I do. And I do, as I said, even though there are so many people I see in our industry, I think, God, they get to a certain age where I feel like they're going the wrong way, like down the slippery slope. They're just not as enthused about what they used to do.
I could imagine.
But I'd be kidding myself if I didn't say the brand of Marshall White's really helped, because if you look at the type of properties we handle, if I look at the agents that surround me, from HR to property management to the admin support, I'm not just saying it, it's incredibly good. So I couldn't do what I do without that support. And I've got a really good team around me, my own team, but I rely heavily on some agents at different offices who I trust in, believe in, who I think are really good at what they do when I've got a client that might own something that's outside my core market. So that's still relevant as well. I need to be able to trust a colleague to look after that client really, really well.
Of course, that's great that you can trust everyone within your brand. And lastly, I'll ask one last question. So you do mentor agents. Can greatness be taught, or must you be born with it?
No, that's a great question. I don't get asked that often. I think I can't motivate someone for a long period of time. I mean, I might have an immediate impact on that person where for the next day or few days or week, there's great enthusiasm, thinking they're feeding off my energy, if you like, Madeline, for what I do. But I think also you can certainly teach a skill set. You can teach someone how to be, in our industry, we call it be good at scripts. So when you're communicating with clients, and that might be vendors, it might be buyers, how good are you at communicating with them? And is the message believable? Is it realistic? Yes, is there some genuine enthusiasm there, not forced and not sound like it's too rehearsed, because that's one of the skills definitely to be a great real estate agent. But for me, I've always learnt with the people around me, and you take a little bit from different operators and say, well, what can I put into my business? We've got some incredibly good operators within our team. We've got, to me, a bit of a standard at the moment with a guy, Ben Manolitzis, at our Albert Park office, and there are many rising stars and very accomplished operators at our company, but Ben really just has it all together to me. He's got an amazing attitude to what he does professionally. And I think for the younger people, I mean, I'm 60 in October this year, Madeline, and I look at Ben, who's so much younger and in his 30s, and to me, for the younger agents, it's more within reach, if you like, because for some people they say, well, James, much as your mentoring means a lot to me, you've done this for 40 years. I've been in real estate for 2 years. I've been in real estate for 6 months or 4 or 5 years. So that it's an industry, to me, you need about 5 years, Madeline, in my opinion, it's like a qualifying period to build up enough contacts, to also build up confidence and belief in what you're conveying to a vendor.
Knowledge in what you're doing yourself and being able to educate others, even if it is your vendors or whoever it is, your clients, you need to have that level of understanding yourself.
I agree. And I think the qualification of buyers is always important, but it's especially important at the moment. I mean, it's a sense of, there are simple things that I'll convey in that mentor session. The agents do have an ability to come and listen and watch me do prospecting. They can do it online. They can sit in my office for 2 hours. But I would say for 2 hours, for $500, they'll earn tens and tens and tens of thousands of dollars to be, to me, exposed to how I go about it. So it's tempo of phone calls, it's how I build rapport, it's how I relate to that person. So to me, it's such a small amount of money, but there's only a certain number of people that commit to doing that. And I think, what an opportunity. I'm opening the doors. Now, I don't do it with my competitors, Madeline, for obvious reasons.
Oh, you don't? Oh, because I was going to say, any real estate agent listening to this, they should jump on it.
Not my immediate competitors, but there's enough people that can still benefit from it.
So they don't need to be with Marshall White, though?
No, they don't have to be with Marshall White. There are Marshall White people that naturally listen in. But I've had one of our directors, I think, that's listened to me 4 or 5 times because there's always things that you pick up from a 2-hour session. So that's part of it. I probably do less individual mentoring than I used to. There's a couple of standout agents that I feel I've mentored for many, many years, and Rob Sheen at Fletcher's in Blackburn, and Zaylee, who's got her own business, Shelter Real Estate, mainly Glenarris Ashburton.
Yeah.
There are a couple of standouts, but there's plenty of others. I feel I've had a positive impact on their careers. But as you know, like anything in life, when you listen to anyone that you think's skilled at what they do, it's a matter of what you then implement. It's one thing to listen and learn, hopefully, from those things, but what are you going to actually put into play? What are you going to actually... And that's what I used to do with... I'd go along to probably, to me, one of the greatest agents that the country's ever produced, John McGrath, and I'd say, what can I put into my business that I feel is going to resonate with my clients, and that's what I've been good at over the years. So that's part of it, definitely. But I feel like I've had a positive impact on the industry, but that's for others to judge.
No, I think you have. Thank you so much for joining me today. I feel so grateful to have you here.
Pleasure, Madeline. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Buying Melbourne. Move with intention. Until next cycle.